take me longer to find the video than to actually
Did
do
just
it.
show you how to do it?
That's bad.
So they know how to do it now. Now they're 15, 14 years old. So now.
Must be.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting has been given in accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act by posting a copy of the notice of this meeting in the first floor lobby of the municipal building, and also by posting this electronically on the township's website, and by publishing a copy in the newspaper designated by the township. This meeting is being broadcast live on Channel 34 and is being streamed live and will be available on demand on YouTube. We are conducting a quasi-judicial proceeding this evening, meaning that the board has powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and that we're obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from information that's provided to us to provide the basis of official action. Any questions or comments should be limited to those issues that the board can legally consider in reaching a decision, and decorum appropriate for a judicial proceeding should be maintained at all times. First thing on our agenda this evening is our roll call.
Mr. Borshoff.
Here.
Vice Chair Brodoff.
I'm here.
Mr. Campbell.
Present.
Mr. Graham.
Here.
Mr. Ortiz.
Here.
Mr. Pierre.
Present.
Mr. Terry is excused. Ms. Willis. Chair Nguyen.
Here.
Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
And Mr. Neiman.
Here.
Okay. We also have Mr. Charles Raboli here on behalf of Arthur Neese.
Okay. I don't believe we have minutes.
No, I
We
wasn't
don't have
able
any resolutions.
No.
So the only thing that we have on our agenda this evening is the council referral regarding the small cell wireless facility.
Yeah, just to summarize, the township has been working on a small cell wireless ordinance for the past year or so. The need for a small cell wireless ordinance became evident because these facilities are essentially permitted by right in the public right-of-way, unless municipalities adopt ordinances that are generally address location issues, aesthetic issues, under the Federal Communications Act, and I reference the various acts in my report. We are allowed to adopt ordinances that regulate these in some manner. We can't ban them. We have to provide for them. So the Township Municipal Facilities Advisory Committee worked on the ordinance. We reached out and had some recommendations of changes to the ordinance from outside counsel who specializes in this across the country, not specific to New Jersey, and drafted a proposed ordinance. We also met with the zoning subcommittee here of the planning board, as well as Bill Harrison from the Board of Adjustment, who has a lot of experience with his board because they see a lot of these applications, to revise the ordinance and massage the ordinance that was originally introduced by the Township Council. So the ordinance that was introduced by the council on April 24th is quite a bit different from the previous ordinance. The previous ordinance allowed these uses administratively in a separate chapter of the code. This new ordinance puts it in the zoning section and that's basically regulating small cell wireless facilities in the public right-of-way. So that's a significant change, and the way it's drafted right now, if any of these facilities are in residential zone districts, it requires them to come to a board, either the planning board or the zoning board, depending upon the specifics of what's being proposed. But it comes to a board for board approval. It requires public notice. The way it's drafted here, the people who would be noticed would be anybody who is within 200 feet of a proposed facility based on the utility pole. We'd have to draw lines around each of those utility poles within 200 feet, and that would be the notice list. It's a little bit different because usually it's property lines, but because these facilities are in the public right-of-way, we're measuring it based on the actual poles themselves. There's a whole lot of other things in the ordinance. If these are if somebody comes in and proposes these facilities in commercial districts, we're requiring them that they be smart poles, that if there's underground utilities, that the connections remain underground. And if it's in a historic district, or if it's in a historic district or in the other commercial districts outside of Bloomfield Avenue, they have to be decorative poles. So there's a whole host of requirements in here in terms of procedures. We added a lot of submission requirements to what was originally proposed. And I think that's in a nutshell. If anybody has any specific questions or comments, I'm certainly here to answer them. And what the task tonight, of course, is because it's in the zoning ordinance, according to the municipal land use law, it has to be referred to the planning board to evaluate the ordinance for its consistency with the master plan. And as you see in my report, our master plan being the elements of the master plan, notably the unified land use and circulation plan, and the conservation plan, and the historic preservation plan, the housing plan, and the I'm missing something. It's either the stormwater or the conservation plan. Those components of our master plan are silent with regard to wireless facilities, but our 2016 master plan reexamination report does include a recommendation that the township consider whether any amendments to the zoning ordinance are necessary concerning telecommunications infrastructure required for new technologies such as Wi-Fi. So I do think that this is consistent with the master plan because it's a direct recommendation out of our 2016 reexamination report.
Janice, just a quick question. So I want to channel our former colleague Carmel Hoffman for a minute, because I saw in the ordinance that there's what looks like a requirement to camouflage the facilities. Who's in charge of that? Because in other words, we have required with other applications that when, we wanted them to kind of hide the things that are not, that aren't visually attractive. And so it would be consistent with the spirit of the master plan if there was a requirement here to minimize the visual impact. And it looks like there is, but who's the arbiter of that?
And to maintain it, and to maintain the camouflage, right?
Well, okay, who's responsible for determining how it's camouflaged. If it's going to a board through a public hearing process and an application, then it would be the board that's approving the application. If it's the type that gets administrative approval, it would be the township. It would be township staff who reviews it to make sure like the smart poles are appropriate.
Can we ensure that they're providing sufficient maintenance to maintain the camouflage?
I believe that there's something, and there's a section in the ordinance that has to do with maintenance.
There is. I don't know if.
Yeah, that was the one
Right,
part
it
that
didn't address-
I thought it was just a little weaker than I think
Agreed.
would be ideal. That it would be,
Okay,
because I think the only, I don't disagree with any
I
of this.
think
but
it's on page 12.
Yeah, the one comment that I had to this was just sort of how
Yeah.
there's a one-time approval process where they're going to come in and say whatever they're going to say, and then time passes, and the question is sort of who, what's the process, and are there teeth in the ordinance to require whoever's box it is to maintain it in that way, not just for its operational specs, but its camouflage and visual lack of impact.
We could take a look at that and see if we can tighten up that section.
Yeah.
That might be a recommendation that the planning board has to the council to tighten up the requirements for maintenance.
And
It's similar. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jake. No. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think an interesting addition to the camouflage may be allowing these to be used for types of public art. So especially in like the business districts, having them be something that can showcase something creative or fun could be a nice way to have it not just be like a gray-green box the way a lot of telephone or power boxes may be.
That's true. Hopefully, I think if our utilities are underground, any large boxes would have to be underground.
Yeah.
But yes, to incorporate
So
public
not
art.
just camouflage, but also making them visually attractive in other ways.
Well, those would be smart poles.
Okay.
So it would be a little bit different.
Well, then boxes wherever, but, yeah.
I have a question regarding the smart poles, since
Yeah.
that seemed like a legitimate segue.
Yeah.
I understand, like, conceptually what they are, and it seems in the designated areas where they're going to be required, there are options for the type of features and services they can provide, like public Wi-Fi. Who's in charge of making the decision as to, like, what features
That would be the township.
and then they can determine definitively what they want,
Yeah,
if they want
yeah,
to
if we
provide
wanna-
public
if-
Wi-Fi?
The idea is if we want to put cameras on those.
Right.
For public safety, we'll have the ability to require them to put cameras on them. If we
And it's the
wanna
township's
put-
responsibility then, to then install it, or?
No, it would be, because there's an agreement. There's always an agreement between the township, because or if it's on township land, or if it's the county, it's with the county. But there would be an agreement, and between the network provider and who's building those, and then we would dictate what we want on those, which may be cameras, it may be some kind of signage to indicate, how many spaces are available in some of our parking lots. I don't know what they're going to be, but we want to have the ability
Sure.
to require them, depending on what our needs are at that location.
Yeah, like citywide Wi-Fi for the public, perhaps.
That's true.
And would only the residents within 200, was it 200 meters, yards? I forgot the measurement. Feet?
It's 200 feet.
200 feet.
In the resident, if it's not in the commercial districts,
Yeah.
but in the residential areas, it's 200 feet drawn around where the proposed facilities are, the pole,
Sure.
which is odd, because the municipal land use law always requires 200 feet from the property line, but there is no property line, because it's in the public right-of-way.
So I had a
Yeah,
question
so-
about that, too.
Can I finish my thought? I'm sorry.
Whether or not that 200 feet is really adequate.
That's
I don't think
that's
you
where I was
can go
going.
beyond 200 feet.
Excuse me?
I don't think we can go beyond 200 feet.
Well, 200 feet, but when we're dealing with a property,
Yeah.
You've got 50 to 100, maybe a couple hundred feet that you're
Right.
getting in, that you're pulling in, as opposed to one single point. So you're losing maybe property owners, you're losing some around the fringe. So could we designate it 200, could we designate that point a little bit larger, make the measuring point a little bit larger? As opposed, if you don't want to go beyond 200 feet, if that's for some reason fixed, although why would it be fixed?
Because that's what the municipal land use law says, is that notice is from 200 feet from the property line.
Right,
we
but it's
have-
from
we're going to have multiple, we're going to have multiple points. So if there's multiple, around each facility, it'll be 200 feet. So those who are within 200 feet,
Right, but how close would these facilities be to one another, when you're saying multiple?
I don't know.
Well,
You
so
might
again-
have, if they're coming, we want them to come in, we anticipate that they'll come in with a network plan that shows how they'll provide service.
So I imagine that they're not going to be block by block,
You know,
It's probably going to be a little larger range. So again,
I have no answer to that.
So again, going back to the issue about including, how do we include more people, more potentially impacted people in this notice provision? If we're going to go 200 feet from a point, can we change the definition of what that point is?
But I know when the state, for example, does work on a highway project, they will notify all the property owners on the frontage of the roadway that's being worked on. So it'll say between the blocks of Bloomfield Avenue and Claremont, right, notify the property owners who front on it. So perhaps 200 feet and the property owners on the immediate block may be sufficient and within kind of normal practice for making these notifications?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a consideration. It's not something that I was trying to figure out, again, difference between property notice
Well, I
and point notice, but
I think if we do that, let's just not do the 200
200.
feet. Let's just do the block, the block on each side of the street.
Yeah.
Because that way we don't have to, we won't be drawing these 200-foot lines. We'll just use the properties that are on that block.
could potentially the properties that back up to
Behind.
those lots also really be interested, be within, have a legitimate interest in knowing that there's going to be some sort of, transmission tower located near to their property.
I wouldn't say tower.
Again, antenna.
Antenna's on a
Antenna, yeah.
utility pole, because the
Yeah.
maximum height's limited to 30, it's 30 feet in a
Right.
residential
I'm
district.
thinking more in terms of the impact of what's coming out of it.
Okay.
In the scope of what's coming out of it. It's omnidirectional as opposed to linear. So,
Sorry, Janice, circling back to complete my thought. The antennas that'll be placed there, would the residents be notified of the features that are included in the antenna? So for example, if there's a video camera, would they be notified that there's a camera, or they're just notified that there's an antenna there?
These don't include, the ones that are in residential districts
Will-
don't
will
include.
not.
There's no cameras. The cameras would only be in our business districts.
Okay.
If we decide we want them there. If in the residential areas, it's just the small cell wireless facilities, that's it.
Okay. All
Okay.
right, thanks for clarifying.
and the notice that comes out will detail what they intend to install in that.
It will, yeah, we'll discuss the location I don't really know. I assume we'd attach a map showing the location, and then the details would be on file in our office, as all applications are.
Right. I'm a little bit more specific,
Yeah.
and going back to your point. When you say a small cell wireless facility, okay, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. And I'm sure, there's a large percentage of property owners who doesn't know what that means. And that's now, let's say technology evolves 12 months from now, which it frequently does.
Right, right.
And new features are added into that. It's not just 5G, now it's 5G plus something else. So will the notice specify, here's what's going to be installed, and this is what it's capable of doing?
I think that we can require that the notice state whatever we want, that it's what kind of.
Well, I think that would be,
wireless
I think
facility.
that's the kind of notice that we would
Yep.
want to put out there
Yep.
for the public.
Sorry, I don't know why I didn't have this thought before. My law firm represents 2 major cell companies. Does that mean I should recuse?
Is this for a specific?
I mean, we don't have any interest in, but
Yeah.
including I do work for one of them. I mean, I'm happy to recuse, but I just
Okay,
didn't.
well, let's talk it through. There's not a particular applicant before us at the moment,
That's why I didn't think of it until just this minute.
right? Okay. So as there's not a particular applicant before us, I would toss it back to you, do you feel that you can
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I didn't.
justify the matter? Can you
I'm-
articulate it neutrally and without bias?
Yes.
All right, then I don't see a problem for it. And remember, where we're going to end up at the end of the night, I don't think everybody was in the room at the time when we spoke about this, but some of you were, was ultimately what you're doing is you're rendering a consistency determination, which is advisory, and then beyond that, anything that you're putting in your notes right now about making them red, white, and blue, or whatever, is even more of an advisory opinion, so to speak. So coming down to it, you're not voting on anything which has a particular effect on a party. So I think you're okay.
Thank you. And I've disclosed on the record that my law firm does work for 2 major cell companies, so there we go.
And, I had a question. These regulations are not going to apply to county right-of-ways because the county makes its own decisions
Right.
and does its own thing? Okay. And then I just want to understand, so is each particular pole going to require a separate site plan hearing?
No, the anticipation, if you look, the
Yeah.
submission requirements is they come in with a network plan.
Okay.
Because we anticipate that the network plan is going to show exactly how it all
Yeah.
fits together. And if there's an area that needs a variance, then the board should be able to say, I don't think that this particular pole at this particular location works well. Why don't you look at, to work with them
Yeah.
to find a network plan that I hope accomplishes all of the goals that we have here to minimize any variances or requests for a variance and minimize the impact.
So I had a question about where permitted. It's page 5, section B at the bottom, and it runs into page 6. And it looks like in the commercial zones and the combination zones, it's permitted anywhere in the public right-of-way. In the residential zones in subsection 2, we restrict, we say, small cell wireless facilities, this is subsection B, may be located on private property only when the use is non-residential. I'm wondering why, with the combination properties like the OR3 or the NC zones, perhaps we should have a similar restriction with respect to residential property. I mean, if I'm in OR3 and I'm in a garden apartment, and all of a sudden my landlord decides he wants to put, one of these on the property itself, that might make me uncomfortable.
Okay. Okay.
So we
That's-
can
you
further-
You can make that recommendation. The idea was, we really wanted, we were trying to protect the single, the 1 and 2 families, our residential zone districts.
Right, but an
and
NC zone is, that's mixed use, right? I mean, OR3 is garden apartments, right? So if they're lumped into this, you could feasibly put one of these right smack dab in the middle of, an apartment complex.
You could put it in an apartment complex,
Right.
yes. Yeah.
So I don't know what everybody else feels about that, but I think we should restrict, the restriction that we have for single family, 2 family should probably apply to any of the residential
I mean,
properties.
I think that gets a little dicey because there's plenty of people living in C1 zones too. Just because they're not zoned
But we-
for residential, just because they're not a primarily or even partially resident, like how many people live on Bloomfield Avenue?
I mean, that's fair,
And
but,
so I think it's just, at that point, you're doing for everything.
but if there's no perfect solution for this, right? I mean, look, we all recognize C1 has different zoning rules, right? And we all live with that. But if we can at least restrict some of the residential areas, I think it would be unfair to, again, residents in a garden apartment have no right to push back against their landlord.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree as the resident of a small garden, of a garden apartment. I just, I think that's just moving the line a little bit to one direction, and I don't know, I don't have a strong feeling on it, but
Okay.
there are plenty of people in other zones, and
I would just
Yeah.
prefer that we restrict as many residential areas as possible. I don't know how everybody else thinks, but.
Would it
You-
restrict, or would it just require them to go through the process?
Yeah.
It says in B2 subsection B that, again, small cell wireless facilities may be located on private property only when the use is non-residential. So I think that's that sounds like a restriction to me.
Let me tell you why we did that. The concern was in the residential areas, that a lot of the properties, the utility poles are located in the backyards. So we're trying to make this work without having anybody use utility poles that are in the backyards. That's why we say it has to be in the public right-of-way, not in a utility easement. And even if those utility easements aren't shown on a tax map, it is in effect a utility easement where those utility poles are. The Federal Communications Act says that we have to, or the law, it says that we have to treat these the same as we treat any other utilities. But we're trying to push it and say, no, you may have other utilities on those poles in your backyard. We want to have these facilities be within the public right-of-way. Now, acknowledging that, number one, some of the areas may not have utility poles in the front yard. And another, some of our areas, we have a setback of 50 feet from an antenna to a residential home. There's a lot of areas that are much closer than that, where it may be very difficult to find a location. We wanted to provide some flexibility where if there is a different kind of use, such as a house of worship, or we do have some commercial uses, or parks or whatever in those residential zones or residential areas. So we could provide alternatives, so they still get the benefit of providing this service, but without having antennas, having to
Right.
require a variance to have when it's too close to a house.
But I'm hard pressed to think of an area in an NC or OR3 zone that doesn't have commercial specific areas where they would have sufficient area on the public right-of-way to put these antennas, right? I mean,
I don't know, what did you just mean, that they?
I'm saying, I don't, in these districts, the NC and the OR3, I'm hard-pressed to think of an area where it's all garden apartments lining up and there's going to be nowhere to put these
Right.
these antennas,
Yeah,
right?
you're
So,
right.
so if we can further restrict,
If I can add some, these communication modules or nodes, I know in, where is it? Asbury Park had the program last year, and they put the towers up. And if anything, they're on streetlight poles.
yeah,
So if they're on streetlight poles, you wouldn't need to have access to high power. These modules are on streetlights, so you wouldn't really need to go to somebody's backyard for a streetlight.
yeah,
So-
and I just want to.
So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
I don't see that there's any need to go in back of somebody's yard to do this.
Yeah,
But again, this is why I would love to have seen what they're using and how much requirement there is. Because without that we get into the problem of saying, well, could we use the backyard or not? Well, can you use a street light? If you can use a street light, you could cross that one part out. And
Yeah.
it would make no,
and it provides more protection for the residents.
right.
So.
Is it possible to put the same restrictions on the residential zones for any parcel classified as a 4C apartment?
Which restriction are you talking?
The restriction about putting the small cell wireless facilities may located in private property only when the use is non-residential. Could we add that restriction to the OR3, OR4, and C zones?
I think that's
and
what Michael was talking
that-
about.
Right, but
Yeah.
the language would specify, rather than including it just in the zone itself, saying specifically for 4C apartment
Yeah,
buildings.
absolutely, we can move that.
Because that kind of
requirement.
narrows it down.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Or any 4C apartment building.
I think we just make that, from what you're saying, if I just take that and make that a requirement for all zones,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
I think that's fine.
Add that requirement for all zones.
Can we do that in the C1 though? Is that feasible?
They got so much right away.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right, fair enough, fair
I would
enough.
say that.
So then, yes, let's do it for all zones.
Perhaps you
Yeah.
exclude mixed-use development, so it would
Like-
be 100% residential, but it wouldn't apply to mixed-use development.
I would want to keep mixed-use development in there, but I guess maybe that's too difficult in
I think that would,
C1, but,
we have a lot of mixed-use development.
Yeah.
It's essentially a commercial building. So,
And they're not always separate structures, right? I mean, we are talking about just utilizing an antenna on top of a building as
Right.
well. So if we restrict all residentials, and it does concern me legitimately, but if it was restricted to like exclusively on the top of buildings and no actual use of utility poles, then it might still be that middle ground. Versus, right, it's not a separate entity, it's not a separate
I think,
structure.
well,
it's-
these will not be on the top of the buildings, because these have, well, I guess they could. Generally, they're only 30 to 50 feet tall, but I guess you have some buildings that are that height as well.
I mean, there was talk at one point that larger buildings were going to need to build an internal infrastructure for 5G, because even mounting the antennas outside wouldn't penetrate far enough into the buildings. And I don't know where that stands now, or if we have any buildings that are that large as to need that, but that
That
could be
issue-
something that's necessary.
Yeah, that issue hasn't come up. We've been focusing on just the public right-of-way in
Okay.
this ordinance, so. And we added this as an exception so that to give a little bit flexibility to make these networks work.
And will this affect the current cell towers that are out there?
No, that's a different, those are called, those are regulated.
Because some of those
by-
are building mounted as well.
Those are a different kind of technology, and
Okay.
they're regulated in a separate section of the zoning ordinance, which we left the same. We're not touching that. Those are, we're defining them as macro cells, but they transmit over a much larger distance. These transmit over a much smaller distance.
Okay.
Is it safe to assume that these structures are going to all be specific to a single provider, right? Versus, are they going to share networks, or are multiple providers going to be able to share?
The way the ordinance is written is we don't propose any co-location. We want to, because co-location on utility
Irrelevant.
poles can be very heavy,
Yeah.
and we put a limit on the amount of equipment on any one utility pole.
So if they want to share, it's up to them.
We don't allow it.
Well, I'm saying even if they want to share access to their specific
Oh, that,
network.
yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
okay,
yeah. Sorry,
they
that's what I
can't,
meant.
you can
They
only
can
have,
share space.
you can only have
Understood.
one antenna
Right.
on a pole.
Right, and then that's what I'm saying, is technically they could share that actual antenna if they chose to, the provider.
That's- Right, that's more of an operational decision. I don't know how that works because they're on different wavelengths, so.
Right. Yeah.
Any other comments?
I thought the letter we received today from Americans for Responsible Technology had some interesting suggestions. I thought, in particular, providing that township engineers can perform random tests would be wise.
I think it's in there.
Random tests?
Yeah, I think if you look under,
Let me just add a
The further we
disclaimer.
get from our mandate, the more uncomfortable I get with this whole thing. I mean, that's why, I mean, we're.
I think it's worth discussing, though. I mean,
Why?
why what?
We're the planning board.
I know.
I mean, I think we ought to, I mean, the more we get afield from the master plan and start commenting to the council, it's not, you know, at that point, we're just residents. We're commenting on things that are way beyond our expertise, our mandate as the planning board.
Fair enough. But I still think it's worth putting on, at least discussing on the record.
Okay, let me just add a disclaimer before you go on,
Sure.
because I understand that a letter was handed out, and that's what you're referring to, and somebody handed me a copy of it. So I just want to read from the land use book on this before you guys go
Sure.
off with your discussion. So it says, often a board receives letters of objection or petitions from members of the public for or against a proposed variance. Such documents are not admissible, though, of course, the writer of a letter or signer of a petition may appear and testify. Where the writer or signer is not available for cross-examination, however, such documents should not be received into evidence by the board. So,
Is that for an application, or is that just purely for even discussing?
okay. No, I mean, you're- ultimately, you're going to discuss it, right? You've got the letter, you've read the letter, and you want to talk about it, and that's your prerogative, okay?
I didn't get the letter. I don't want the letter. I don't want to, I have no interest in the letter.
I mean, we're here, we just know there's no public comment, so we're happy to.
Good. Well, it's just now evolved into that. You're handing out this to everybody.
Oh, you don't want it?
Don't want it.
Did you want to recuse yourself because it seems?
No, he already stated he didn't. I don't even.
Thank you.
You have?
I have it.
And you guys have?
Okay. So, there you go. To that point, you have a letter in front of you.
Okay.
It's written by somebody who's not here. They make certain assertions in the letter which you're not able to probe to see whether they're true or not. Comment is always fair comment, okay, but there are factual references in there or questionable factual references in there. So again, that's just a disclaimer. You're here, it's not a public meeting, and you're all able to take it with, you know, you're able to apply your own logic to it. So you certainly can do whatever you wish, but I just wanted to put that on the record for everybody's understanding.
Okay.
Okay?
Fair enough. And I understand your position, Jeff. I know where you're coming from. I thought we did address, the chair addressed the notice issue, right? I think that was well thought out. But I don't know if we want to address any of the other points, if I'm the only one who is interested in talking about the indemnification issue, if I'm the one who's interested in talking about ensuring that the random tests are permitted, because I think that's important to protect the residents, right? So if anybody else has an opinion on, first, the town engineer performing a random test, I'll leave that to the board. Does anybody else have any thoughts on it?
If we get into this, I do have to walk. But
Is
I
it
mean,
that?
yeah. It's none of our business. It's none of our business. We lose credibility if we start doing stuff like that. But
You want a cell tower in your own backyard?
I disagree with a member of the public who made a statement
I mean,
that I think was...
I'm a big boy. I mean, that's not...
No, I know, but I understand what you're saying. You're not saying that you don't care about this issue. What you're saying is that
saying all of us could go before
we have a mandate, right, on this
All of
board.
us
We
can
have
go
a
before
job to
council
do.
and opine.
And you make a fair point. I may be overstepping that bounds.
It's not I mean, I have in my ear, when the council said what it said about Lackawanna, they were mostly wrong, but there was, in my view, but there was a kernel of, when we get beyond our mandate as the planning board and use our limited time on the dais to opine to the council as though we are more privileged than other citizens, I think we lose somewhat of our ability to, when we are within our expertise and our mandate, we lose a little bit of that credibility when we consider things that are beyond the normal scope of the planning board. And so where we draw that line, I do not have revealed wisdom on. And if I wouldn't use a word like overstep, because you're a member of you outrank me. I mean, you're on the start, I'm an alternate. My opinion is that, now at this point, we're way far afield in my view. But if others feel differently, but because this kind of stuff would touch on clients of mine, I would have to leave if we're going to start getting into that. That's where I was going.
My thought on this is that, some of these applications are likely to come before us. So there are issues that perhaps we should get ahead of now and address now. And perhaps the appropriate time for that is during the application phase. But I think...
Is that right, though, Jan? I mean, because I didn't understand
Would we not have any review over, would any of these come before us? I thought there was a potential for these to come before the planning board.
A board, I thought, but not us.
No, it may be, no,
It
Yeah.
could be us.
it'll be either you or the Board of Adjustment.
Or the Board of Adjustments, yeah.
Or it could still be an administrative review.
It depends. If it's in a residential district, it goes to a board. If it's in a non-residential district, it's done administratively.
And what board it goes to depends on what the issues are in the specific application.
So in that sense, we do have a greater interest in analyzing these issues.
Normally, we talk about the things that come up in our normal discussion,
Mhm.
and in our discussion of the issues that we see with respect to the master plan and how it's conformed. We don't bring into consideration, at least specifically and openly, that, a group with a particular interest has written a letter, and based on that letter, we want to. And so that's kind of what bounces us out
I see.
of the perspective.
I'm not
So for the-
advocating.
So,
Yeah.
so the damage is done. There's no taking it back.
But I don't think there's,
So the issue is, if these things are of a legitimate concern to you.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, then you put them on the record, and
Okay.
we'll address them as your concerns, and then we'll move on.
Fair enough.
But, we should make every effort not to bring these sort of things into this discussion, because this is not the public hearing. This is our specific job to review something and to comment on with respect to the master plan. And the comments from the public has their opportunity. These people have their opportunity to go before the council and make these points.
Fair enough. I was not advocating one way or another. I thought they were
It's
points
kind of the
that
way that you
could...
brought it. It's the way that you brought it up.
Okay. Because I thought there were some interesting points worth discussing. I wasn't necessarily advocating one way or another, but I thought there were some interesting points that should be considered, and things that may impact our future review of these towers, or antennas, Janice.
So with that said, there's a couple of points that you've addressed with
Mm-hmm.
respect to the
A random engineering testing, I thought you, Chair, addressed the notice provision
Right.
sufficiently.
And for the record, I haven't read this letter.
Fair enough.
I don't know what's in it.
I did
So
not mean to
my
imply
comments-
that
my
they were
comments
based
weren't
off of
inspired by
this,
it.
but, yeah.
But the, the random inspection, I mean, always sounds like a good idea from, a general standpoint, so I don't have a problem
Okay.
with recommending that, You know, when we start talking about things like indemnification, and I really think that
Okay, fair enough. If that's outside of our purview, outside of our scope,
Takes
I
us-
will,
takes
I
us
will,
far- too
I will
far
yield
outside.
on that point. Okay,
All right?
fair enough.
Anybody else have anything that they want to add?
Do we have an outline of what will be included in the network plan when it's presented to us? Like what details? Maybe I skipped it in my
No, all you
reading.
have is what's in the ordinance, which is
Okay.
the requirement for
Yeah,
what's
the
in the.
net, that would be a part of the actual
So we'll get those,
application.
we'll get further detail.
Right.
Okay.
So the requirements for a network plan are on page 8, the bottom of page 8. You know, I mean, it clearly, I think, identifies what should be provided.
But it's not necessarily limited to that.
That's what,
And it's going to be the details of it, which is really what's going to be
That's
important.
correct.
It's going to depend on what they want to do, what they decide to do, when they actually want to do something.
that's what
The
I'm
way,
interested
the
in.
way it works with development applications is we have to determine completeness. And to determine completeness, you have a checklist. So that's why part of this is in the land use procedure section. And one of the submission requirements in the land use procedures is a network plan. And then we define what's required in the zoning ordinance. So if they submit what's provided here, that means we have a complete application. You can always ask for more once they come before the board, but this is what needs to be required.
starting point.
For that process to start.
Understood.
And as always, you know, when we see something and questions come up and they don't have answers for them, we deal with that.
Yeah.
Anything else? Well, Janice, I think you've got a list of the concerns that the board
Yeah,
would
I
like
have
to
a,
express. But I think our position is, we think that in general, it's in compliance with the master plan. And there's some things in it that we'd like to see addressed, that we think are a good idea to be addressed,
okay.
you know, in terms of the community.
I have requirements for maintenance should be added. Public art on the facilities in the commercial district should be
I'm okay with
explored.
anywhere, but I know it gets dicier.
The notice requirements should be expanded to include property owners with frontage on both sides of the street where facilities are proposed, and should include the width of the block on each side.
At least.
So
At
it's the
least.
entire, it's basically the entire block. Notice should accurately describe the wireless facility that is proposed. You want to further restrict the antennas in the, add that language from the residential district to the commercial district, section B2B, I got that. And then you support the suggestion for random testing and inspections. Okay? All right, I got it.
And so, do we need we don't need a vote, do we?
I think,
I think you should.
yeah.
Okay. Then I'll make a motion that we present our opinion to the council as outlined in our discussion.
Is there a second? Kevin, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain.
Okay.
And I note that Mr. Jacobson.
We'll note in the record that he felt necessary to
yeah,
recuse himself.
To recuse himself. Okay.
All right. I think that's all the business we have this evening, guys. So I move that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
All right. Thank you all.